The Patterson Casting Club, Oldham Pond, North Haledon, New Jersey, 1939. Joan Salvedo has won the New Jersey Sub-Junior Dry Fly Championship. She is 12 years old. In 1945, Joan wins 3 national casting titles. The next year, she is featured in newspaper stories and begins appearing on the cover of regional and national magazines. 2 years later, Joan is in Paris, competing in the Little River event of the French National Casting Tournament in the Bois de Boulogne. Joan calls this photograph caught because that's where her fly is. Joan has been collecting national casting championships since 1943. In 1951, she wins a national distance fly casting title against all-male competition. Shortly thereafter, Joan turns professional and performs at sportsman shows around the U.S. In 1954, Joan is 27 years old and a featured attraction on the show circuit. She demonstrates all kinds of casts as well as different rods. High heels, an evening gown, and jewelry add a touch of glamour to her elegant casting. Such a unique approach helps catapult Joan further into national prominence. She often demonstrates long-distance casting. 1960 is the year Joan sets an unofficial women's distance record for casting a fly, 161 feet. Joan had owned a dance studio and spent years as a dance instructor. Evidence of such training is seen in her smooth and graceful style. In the 60s, Joan lived in Florida, where she stalked all kinds of fish. Fish small and fish large. Joan has fished all around the world for almost all kinds of fish. Here she is landing one of the famous brook trout from the Minipee watershed in Labrador. Joan Salvedo and world-renowned fisherman Lee Wulff marry in 1967. Few sports have ever enjoyed such a perfect first couple. They travel the country, demonstrating and teaching, casting and fishing. By 1970, Lee and Joan develop a short rod with yarn for line that is great for indoor practice. They name it Fly-O. Joan demonstrates wherever they go. By the end of the 70s, Joan has established herself as one of the most respected and knowledgeable leaders in fly fishing. She's personally taught thousands of men, women, and children how to cast and how to fish. And whenever they can, Lee and Joan fish together. After teaching around the world, in 1979, they decide it is time to open their own school. The Wulff Fishing School on the Beaverkill River in the Catskill Mountains of New York. From that start, people from all walks of life, from all around the globe, young and old, male and female, attend the Wulff School and are taught by the best. In 1991, Lee is 86 years old, and while recertifying his pilot's license, his heart stops. The plane crashes and Lee is gone. But Joan does not stop the teaching she began decades ago. During her career, Joan has written numerous articles and authored books on both casting and fishing. She has held casting and fishing titles and been awarded prestigious honors from numerous conservation organizations. Her casting columns have been enthusiastically followed for decades, and she has even been honored by Congress. Today, Joan continues to give us new insights and teaching methods as she carries on the Salvato and Wulff tradition of excellence.
Hi, I'm Joan Wulff, and I started fly casting and fishing as a child, never dreaming of the effect the sport would have on my life and of how much pleasure and joy it would give me. I can only hope that the casting mechanics I've developed over 60 years will help you become more proficient and give you that same joy. And perhaps I can save you some of those 60 years. Fly casting is an art. It brings the fly rod and fly line to life. It's something you can both feel and see. Because it's an art, it takes time to develop. But fly casting is also science, which encompasses mechanics and disciplines. Once you can understand those mechanics, you'll have an unlimited potential. You'll be able to do anything anyone else can do with a fly rod. You'll go through stages. As a beginner, you'll be delighted when your line and leader land on the water in front of you, hopefully without tangling. The second stage is the quest for distance, casting as far as you can. And the third stage is to make each cast, short or long, with grace and precision. Don't expect to absorb all of the facets of fly casting at once. We're going to do this in segments, chapters if you will, so that you can progress one step at a time at your own pace.
Some historians will probably always question the validity of a widely held belief that it was an English nun in the 15th century who gave us the first written account of fly fishing. It is accepted that Britain is the birthplace of fly fishing as we know it. When anglers headed for the river or lake, the stream or pond, they would carry a tree branch with a primitive line attached to the end. Casting back then could not be described as particularly graceful in style or impressive in distance. But casts were made, and fish were caught. While some may debate the role of that 15th century nun in the history of fly fishing, very few question the role of Joan Wulff as one of the sport's greatest teachers.
Early anglers would have cast with whatever was handy, perhaps a willow stick and horsehair lines. And you can cast with a willow stick, or even a broomstick if you want, but this weighs half a pound. So you certainly tire quickly, and it has no action. It doesn't do anything for you. So over the years, rod materials have progressed from willow to bamboo to glass to carbon fibers. Our new rods are made of graphite. Present rods do something for us. And fly lines from horsehair to silk to nylon to plastics. And now we have beautifully machined reels on which to store them. Our rods really do work for us. We just need to impulse it, and it takes over. Let me show you with Flyo. The action of a rod is triggered by loading it. This is loading. It's the bending of the rod from the tip downward by the acceleration of the stroke and the weight of the line. And once we have loaded it, it unloads and projects the line for us. So each stroke, backward or forward, is a loading and unloading action. And we create open-ended, unrolling loops in two directions. Very important. In all other sports, you set up slowly on the backswing and knock the heck out of something forward. But in fly casting, we need to cast backward as well as forward, and that's your first challenge, to develop those backward throwing muscles, which you probably don't have. There's another difference, and that lies in the weight of the lure. If you've been a spin fisherman, or a bait caster, you know that your lure, which this represents, can be thrown by hand almost as far as it can be cast, because it's a rock with a string behind it. But we fish with flies that are artificial flies made of materials like tinsel and yarn and feathers. And if we take one of those materials and throw it as far as we can, it doesn't go anywhere. So the weight we're casting is not in the lure, but in the weight of the line. And the proof of it is that you can cast a fly line by hand without a rod. And the fly goes along as a passenger. Believe me, it's much easier with a rod. We know that a rod has action, and in order to trigger that action to work for us, we need to start with the grip. Our hand is the connecting link. Put that grip at the base of your fingers and set your thumb on top of it so that you could push it as if it were a button you were pushing. It will require that you have a little air space behind that first joint. If you put that grip in the center of your palm and wrap your hand around it, it will be very ineffective. So base of the fingers, thumb on top, a little space. And line it up so your rod is an extension of your arm, or your arm is an extension of your rod. And so that when that is close to you, it's not swinging loosely on the side. Now, in order to cast well, we need to use all three parts of our arm: our hand, our forearm, and our upper arm. And let's start with the forearm. The forearm gives back and forth motion, and it moves back and forth in line with the upper arm. If we have a short line, we only need a short stroke, so we don't use all the inches. If we have a long line, we would bring this muscle back to this muscle. So our stroke length is variable, and it's done with that forearm moving back and forth. Now, within that motion, we need to use our wrist. And the first position is a bent down wrist, so that your hand is down as far as it can go. And the second position is a straight wrist. And the easiest way to relate to that is to put a rod in your hand, and a bent down wrist, the rod is against your arm or parallel to it. And when it is a straight wrist, it is 45 degrees from your arm. 45 degrees, no degrees. And a straight wrist takes it 45 degrees away. It's very easy to see. You can look right there. You don't have to look anywhere else. That tells you that it's right. If you bend your wrist backward like this, which I call wristing, it's a new verb, then it takes the rod shaft very low and back, and the tip throws the line down into the water, and you certainly don't want that. So 45 degrees straight wrist is the max. And every cast will start bent down, end with a straight wrist, start forward with a straight wrist, and end with it bent down. Now, when I was a kid and learned to cast in the 30s, that's all we used. And they would put a book or a dollar bill under your arm, a dollar bill for kids because it was more valuable. And I imagine today they'd probably put a Rolex. But anyway, we could only cast this way, just forearm and hand. Well, that didn't work for me very long, and so I threw away that valuable item and lifted my elbow and found that I could cast much more easily. And so that upper arm is part of the casting stroke, and what it does is lift and lower. So your elbow goes up and down as your forearm is going back and forth. The elbow lifts and lowers, and there's no tension in your upper arm. So fly casting then is the back and forth motion of the forearm and hand within the up and down motion of the whole arm. And it's a bit like a chop, and we end up being able to push with that thumb. So you might practice this. Practice it with your bare hand, or if you're at your desk and no one's watching, you could do a pen, we'll use a pen. Because it's all in the motion of those three parts of your arm that casting is accomplished. Try it with your rod, butt, and reel. And now let me show you how it works with a rod and line. As I've said, fly casting is the back and forth motion of the forearm and hand within the up and down motion of the whole arm. The wrist moves from bent down to straight. The forearm comes back in line with the upper arm. And the elbow lifts and lowers to engage that upper arm action. It's an overall acceleration to a stop. These are the basic elements of good casting. This is a roll cast, the easiest of all casts to learn because it has only one stroke and it's forward. You're used to doing that. Its value is that you can be backed up against trees and bushes where you can't take your fly line out of the water behind you, but you can still fish with that roll cast. Let me show you how to start. In order to make a cast, we have to have fly line out of the rod tip. Between the fly line and the fly is leader, and it's monofilament and has no weight, and it doesn't cast by itself. So we need fly line out, and the fly we're using today is yarn for practice. So we need to have that leader out of the rod and some line. And now we're going to use the action of the rod to get that line to pass through it. We stroke it with our rod hand, feed it with our left. This rod is doing all the work, with just a little motion from me because it exaggerates whatever I do. So now we raise the rod, look at the line that's hanging from the tip, position it behind our shoulder. Now in order for that line not to hit the rod, we have to keep our elbow in, our hand out, so it's separate. Belly it, come to a dead stop. Then check your hand, make sure it's up nice and high. Bring your elbow forward. Now aim at a particular inch of water. You can't just cast and hope. You want to be specific. And then in an acceleration to a stop, just leading with the elbow, finishing with the hand, you'll make your cast. Now, it may not come out of the water on that first cast or the second one, but you just roll cast until it does. When it's in a pile and the fly is sinking, it's hard to get started. So you don't worry about that. Just set it up again and do it until you can get a straight cast. Let me take apart the mechanics and show you exactly what the parts of the cast are that make that work. As you raise the rod to its roll cast position, bring your hand in close to your face, bend your elbow, and put your thumbnail literally up at forehead level. Your wrist will be straight, which is shown by this 45-degree angle between the rod and your arm. After you've lined up with your target area, there'll be two parts to the cast. The first part is movement of this whole arm just the way it is, static. Nothing changes, no extension. You're rocking from the shoulder like this. Your elbow leads, going down, up and down. I call this a loading move. It's the beginning of the loading action. And the final part of the loading action will be in the second part, which is a power snap. I'm going to punch my thumb forward, pull my fingers and this rod butt back up against my arm, that way, for the power snap. That's the end of the acceleration. So part one, 90 degrees, close to your face, lead with your elbow, don't change anything, shift your weight. Part two, snap it. So that power snap at the end is what makes that leader straighten out. Push with your thumb, pull back with your fingers. One flows into the other. You can do it. If you can't do it right away, you'll have to try several things. If your line doesn't unroll completely, part of it unrolls and the rest doesn't, it means your acceleration is not good enough. So finish it out, really push it. If it piles in front of you, it means you chopped too low and you didn't push out soon enough. So look at that target area and move your thumb to it and then accelerate. And hang in there until that leader straightens out. Now, we've been casting on our primary side for a right-hander, and we can do that as long as the wind is cooperating. But if the wind is blowing from our right, it will blow the line into us, and so we need to be able to cast backhand. And so all we do is, instead of having our elbow in and our hand out as we did to start with, we now tilt our elbow out and put the tip of the rod and the line over our other shoulder. We don't have to choke ourselves. because then we'll get some kind of a slice. We change our feet, put the other foot forward, elbow out, hand right in front of the face so you can be accurate. Same two parts of the cast, a loading move and a power snap. So there are two factors that determine whether you're going to cast forehand or backhand. One is the wind, and the other is the position of the line and fly in the water. If you're in a stream and downstream is to your left, then you'll have to do a backhand cast to make it work right. Once you can do backhand and forehand roll casts, you will love it. This is a basic cast, taking line off the water, letting it unroll behind you, and putting it back down. It's the technique you'll use to present wet flies and streamers when you're fishing downstream. Let's look at the back cast. And in order to do that, I want you to be aware of the connection between the fly line, which is very visible, and the leader, which is not. And the leader has no weight. We have yarn on the end for a fly. So when we do a pickup, we want to pick up the line to that leader connection in what we call a loading move, starting with the rod tip next to the water. Lift the line to the leader connection and power snap the leader and fly out. And I'm snapping my finger because I stopped my backward stroke exactly as that fly leaves the water. Lift the line, out with the fly. You must start with the rod tip down so you get everything in place, and you pick it up sweetly with that loading move, not ripping it off with just a power snap. Pick it up inch by inch, but with speed, and you'll see it. If you pick it up with a power snap, then you will rip the water and scare every fish within half a mile. So rod tip down, relax your arm, and now look at my arm. The rod is against it, parallel. We lift it sweetly and swiftly to that leader connection in what we would call a loading move. Lift, snap. Watch my arm now. The rod is parallel to my arm, my wrist is bent down, and I lift that as a unit all the way to that leader connection. Then power snap the leader and fly out, and as we end that stroke, the rod will have changed its position to 45 degrees from the arm with a straight wrist, and my path was up to my forehead. Lift line, snap, fly. Lift, snap, and dead stop it. And you don't need another quarter of an inch beyond getting that fly out of the water. So coordinate it between your hand and your eyes. Out and stop dead. How long do you wait between the back cast stroke and the forward cast stroke? If you do a good power snap, there will be a little shock in the rod, which you'll feel right here. And when that shock dissipates, come forward, and you'll have perfect timing. On the back cast, we led with the hand and finished with the elbow. And on the forward cast, we're going to lead with the elbow and finish with the hand. On the back cast, we had a long loading move, lifting the line to the leader connection, and a short power snap to get the fly out. On the forward cast, we have a short loading move, just a little bit of elbow motion with the arm in its angled position, no change, until your thumb is roughly perpendicular to a target area, then power snap. Now you need to have a target area. You just can't cast and hope that this fly will land. So there's an imaginary line between your thumb and the target, and as you make the stroke, you follow along that line with the thumb. Reach perpendicular, power snap until your thumb covers the target, and the rest is follow through. There's an imaginary line between your hand and that target area, and your thumb follows along it. And when that thumb is roughly perpendicular to it, power snap, and that will unroll the line right above the water so it all lands lightly. Now to review the basic cast, we begin the back cast with the rod tip close to the water. Lift the line sweetly to the leader connection, power snap the leader and fly out, ending as the fly leaves the water. And we wait until the shock has left the rod and then bring it forward. On the forward cast, we lead with the elbow and finish with the hand. doing our power snap at approximately 90 degrees from a target area. That forward power snap is very important. It's a pushing with the thumb and a pulling back with those bottom fingers. So it's a rotation, a very strong move with the thumb and fingers, and it's really very much like the action of a screen door handle. Let me show it to you this way. This looks like a funny contraption. A student made it for me, but it's actually a screen door handle mounted on a rod grip. And you know that when you use a screen door handle, you push with your thumb and pressure that grip, pushing and pulling back against it. And of course the screen door doesn't move, but when you do that with a rod, push with the thumb and pull back, it moves that rod, it rotates it so that the grip comes back up toward your arm and is parallel. Now if we turn it over and just use it as a rod grip, you'll see what I mean. Push with the thumb, pull back with the fingers and bring it up. And this is your forward cast power snap. Push and pull. Push and pull. And with the rod, push and pull again. Push with the thumb, pull back with those fingers. And it will send your fly line zinging out there. This is false casting. Instead of putting the line back on the water, as we did in the basic cast, we keep it in the air. It's the primary technique for dry fly fishing. You can use it to change direction between presentations. Or you can use it to shake water off your fly and keep it dry. And the third use is to measure, is to see if you have enough line out to reach your target. The cast itself is going to be just a power snap for very short lines, as I have here. A fairly slow power snap with the wrist changing position at the end of each stroke. The other thing is that we just bring this forearm back. That's what does the back cast most easily. Bring that forearm right back towards your upper arm. Even though when you first begin, you're probably going to do it like this. But you don't want to hinge up there. You want to bring this in close. The forearm comes back to the upper arm quickly, because on the forward cast you have all the muscles of your right rod hand to push it forward, but on the